Greetings! This week we're going to talk about communication. And your textbook will focus specifically on business communication, but I'd like to propose a question to you strictly about communication in general. Is communication always intentional, or can it also be unintentional? Seriously, think about it for a second. Is something considered communication, a message? Is it truly a message if I didn't intend to see it, to send it? For example, if I'm tired, if I'm really tired, and I'm not aware of my facial expressions, and I look at someone, and they think that I'm really upset with them, even though I have no clue what's going on with my face, was that communication? Because the receiver certainly interpreted a message, but I didn't know that I was sending it. Therein is what makes communication so complicated. It's a transactive process. Okay? Now, I would hope that communication is intentional. If we believe that communication is intentional, which not everybody does, and you're not wrong if you think that communication be intentional, but if communication is always intentional, then it is our job as the message receivers to make sure that we interpret messages based on what we think is probably going on with the sender at that point in time. Because if communication is only intentional, we shouldn't be interpreting everything that we see as an intended message. We should interpret only those things that are directed at us, clearly. Now, the communication process is complicated. If we do intend to send a message, then we have to encode the message in our mind. Actually take together everything we know, given this common set of symbols we have called words, string together a message, and send it out to the other person, who's then going to have to take it in, decode it, put it together with everything they know in their head related to those symbols and the person sending the message, and then send out a response. In the business world, there are three main types of communication as far as directionality goes. There's upward, downward, and horizontal, as they're called. Upward dealing with when it's subordinate to supervisor, downward from supervisor to subordinate, and horizontal between peers. I will tell you that if you are a supervisor and engaging in downward communication, your message is more impactful because power influences the credibility and the impact of every message. It is a stronger message. So your words, your actions have more power, and you need to be especially aware of your messages to make sure that you convey them at the severity you mean to. Also, be aware that the majority of communication that takes place in an organization is informal. Yet, all communication that takes place within a workplace is considered binding. Ethically, you should be aware that any communication you have, especially that which is written down, is considered a legal document. It is a binding contract that you can be held to in a court of law. So whenever you're writing things down, sending emails especially, be very, very careful. The communication is irreversible. Now, on to this bigger idea of what is communication. Okay, is it an intentional process? Is it unintentional? Communication all hinges upon perception. Okay? How we interpret a message depends entirely upon how we process it based on our own world. Perception involves selecting which information we're going to interpret because we never decode all of the message. We select what we think is important and then decode that. Then we organize that information based on what we already have in our head related to it. And then we make an interpretation. So perception biases the way that we interpret our messages. Because of that, we as senders need to be very aware of who we are speaking to and make our messages tailored to our audience to include what we know they're going to be interpreting the message based off of. We each have a cognitive schema. Cognitive schemas are based off of prototypes, personal constructs, stereotypes, and scripts. Prototypes are those general ideas of what a thing would be. For example, if I see the word cat, then I'm going to, in my head, automatically default to that black and white cat picture that was by the letter C on the alphabet cards when I was in kindergarten. That is my prototype of a cat. Forelegs, tail, fuzz, whiskers, pointy ears. Okay? My personal construct of a cat is what cat really means to me. So although I have that prototype of what all cats look like, I'm also going to think of my cat Karma, which means that my personal construct of a cat still has forelegs, tail, pointy ears, whiskers, but also very pretty black fur, golden eyes, very tall and lean. So you have your prototype, what we can all relate to on a base level, your personal construct, which is where some of that bias and interpretation comes in. Then we have stereotypes. The stereotypes are often thought of as a negative thing. However, stereotypes are the only way that we actually can fit all the information we retain into our head, because we group ideas together, we group things together, we group people together based on repetition, based on patterns in our universe. So stereotypes that we have of, say, teachers, for example. Well, we probably assume that teachers are bookwormish, a little nerdly. They probably were good students in high school. They're probably smart, right? Maybe not the most socially graceful is what we would assume if we're going with the nerd stereotype, but we would also give them credibility for their intelligence. So stereotypes don't always hold bad things in them. These are just groups of ideas that we put around one single people group. Okay? And then we have scripts. Those are characteristics that we give people based on a role they have. Again, let's look at the teacher role. Well, if you are a teacher, you should probably be dressing professional. You should probably not be using profanity. You should probably be trying to communicate effectively such that you give eye contact and listen to what your students are saying. These are what we would expect. So tying this all together, if communication is this intentional process, if we're going to adhere to the idea that it's intentional, then we are formulating messages, knowing that every person we speak to is going to have to decode the message not based on what we said, but on their personal cognitive schema of what those words we used meant. Again, if communication is intentional, then we recognize that the sender was doing the best they could based on what they knew of us. And if they don't know us very well, then it's our job to follow up in communication and say, wait a minute, here's what you said, here's how I interpreted this. Is that correct? Did I actually pull the appropriate message out of what you said? And if not, what did you mean? This is incredibly important in the work environment for many reasons. One, you want to make sure you're doing your job correctly. Two, you want to make sure that you're not getting offended when someone didn't mean offense. That breaks relationships and causes tension in the workplace. Right? There are a number of things that influence our perception. Our physiology, our age, our culture, our social roles, our cognitive abilities. All these things take play in how someone is going to interpret a message and how someone's going to package a message. And you have to be a functional, competent communicator, think about how that person likely meant the message that you just received, and how they're going to interpret the message you're getting ready to send. Good communication is thoughtful. It is slow, and it is very, very purposive. Hope this was helpful.